Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for coming to the supplier speaker presentation. This is the second year now where HARDI has provided a speaker specifically geared towards the supplier members. And the speaker we have this year is with Indian River Consulting Group. Steve Deist is a partner with the firm, and he's here to present some feedback on the research project that the HARDI Foundation funded. I guess it's been going on for 9 months?
We wish. It's really only been about 4.
Right.
So
well, we've been talking about it for 9 months. The actual work has been going on the last 4 months. And really what the foundation wanted to try and do was quantify the market demand. You know, what role a distributor plays, what role a supplier plays. So they put a lot of time and effort into it. We're going to get a little sneak peek tonight before the distributors. Tomorrow at the luncheon, Mike Marks from Indian River will do the presentation to the whole, the whole group as a whole. But tonight, you're going to get a little sneak peek from Steve. It's geared towards the supplier portion of the information that they gathered in this research. So let's join in welcoming Steve and welcome you.
Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. I really appreciate your coming on Saturday afternoon prior to cocktails and in the middle of football games. So I'm honored to be here. I'm looking forward to the next hour. It's very exciting, I think, to present the findings of the research that we're going to share with you today. I know there are probably not as many people here. I know some people have not been able to make it because they've been trapped by an ice storm back east. So we just hope that they do get here. And I know in this industry, we often curse the mild weather, right? Because it's bad for business. So I guess when we have crappy weather, we just have to put up with it, right? So thanks again for the introduction. This project is about distributors' role in demand creation in our channel. And what we wanted to try to do was quantify and make their role very objective. So instead of talking about opinions and history and what worked and what didn't work and who sold what and who's not growing, we wanted to create a framework and some models to try to make the distributor's role in demand creation in this channel as objective as we possibly could. So we've been working on this project for about 4 months. I'll talk in a little bit about what was involved in the project in terms of background, but it's been a very intensive project. The key outputs from the project are basically 2 presentations. One is the one that you're sitting in right now, which is being recorded, and the recording will be posted as a webinar on the HARDI website. So if you are reviewing or watching this video as a webinar, I just want you to know that the audience is huge, well-dressed, and extremely good-looking. Mike Marks is going to be presenting tomorrow at lunch. And he's going to try his best not to give anybody indigestion. He's got an hour, 15 minutes that's going to be the presentation of the findings. I'm going to spend the hour today talking to you about a couple of models that we've put together to help you answer some fundamental questions about the distributor's role in demand creation. So today is going to be focused on some models that manufacturers can use to have conversations with distributors. This presentation is currently available on our website, which is at www.ircg.com for Indian River Consulting Group. Don't do IRGC because that's the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Council, and we don't want the NSA coming after anybody here. So ircg.com, the username that you can enter is HARDI, all caps, and the password is new insight, and you'll be able to download a PDF of this. This presentation will also be available on HARDI's website, and after they've posted it, we'll probably take it off of ours. Most of you, or I hope a lot of you, know about Indian River Consulting Group. We've been in this industry for over 25 years. We focus exclusively on wholesale distribution channels, and we look at kind of both ends of the channel. When you're a distributor and you're looking upstream at your channel, you call that supply chain management. And when you're a manufacturer and you look downstream at your channel, you call that channel management. They're really just both sides of the same connection. At Indian River, we work on both ends. So we've got a lot of experience with both distributors and things that are important to them and what their lives look like, and manufacturers trying to sell through distribution. We've been working in building trades for a long time, including the HVACR channel. Done a lot of work for some of the distributors and manufacturers and buying groups in this, so we're relatively experienced in this field. And one of the things that we have found over and over again, and one of the reasons that we're so excited about this study, is that there are a lot of discussions and interactions that go on between manufacturers and distributors about who's supposed to do what and who did a good job and who did a bad job and which distributors are great, which distributors are not so good. And a lot of those discussions tend to be highly subjective, and they tend to almost be sometimes emotional. And one of the things that we found is that sometimes you look at your trading partners and you say that, well, that's really stupid. I can't believe that those guys have taken sales guys off the street. Why would they do that? Why aren't they stocking my product? Why aren't they upselling at the counter? They know that they could make more money with my product than with another product. It doesn't make any sense to me why they're doing what they're doing. But in reality, most of our channel partners are actually fairly astute business people. And if they're doing something a certain way, it's probably because the economics of their situation are driving them to do that. And so what we found in our work with manufacturers and distributors are that a lot of the behaviors that may look irrational or unsophisticated or inappropriate actually make sense when you stand back and look at the world through your channel partner's eyes. And that's absolutely what we found in this study. We want to thank the sponsors of the study who contributed blood, sweat, tears, money, time, access to their people. Some of the folks on this chart gave us incredible access to their data. Some of it is very proprietary and confidential. We used the information to aggregate it together to come up with a story, so we obviously can't divulge any specifics about the people we've worked with. But we've got a lot of great support and help from our sponsors, so we want to acknowledge that and thank them. And if you just join me in giving them some applause to these sponsors who have allowed this study to take place. And we greatly appreciate them. So let's talk a little bit about the research itself and the project. We had over 4 months of pretty intensive work, and the sources of data that we had, fundamentally, we had some pretty in-depth interviews with a lot of end users, with contractors, with commercial, institutional, industrial customers, with other customers of the distributor channel. And those provided a high degree of insight into the channel. We visited 10 distributor locations, and we spent a lot of time with these folks. We sat down and we interviewed the salespeople. We spent hours watching what actually happens at the counter as opposed to what people think happens at the counter. We evaluated their financials and their sales history to understand what they sold, what they didn't sell, what the frequency of repeat business from their customers were. We looked at their product mix. We looked at their way they manage inventory. We did a lot of very intensive work with these distributors. And again, we want to really acknowledge and thank the folks that participated in that. Some of you hopefully also saw the surveys that we put out. We did a manufacturer survey and a distributor survey to try to get more insight. We also had interviews with some thought leaders and some manufacturers, I believe some folks in this room. And we also were able to fall back on the extensive experience that Indian River has in this channel in terms of our understanding of the market and the products and what works and what doesn't work. So this is all the sort of sources of data and information that we collected. And one of the things that's loud and clear from this work is that we had very high level of consistency and uniformity in terms of the information that we got. In other words, the story that we got from the suppliers and the manufacturers was very consistent with the story that we got from the distributors, which was very consistent with the story that we got from the contractors. All of the data elements sort of pointed us in the same direction, and we were able to put that information into our framework, to our Indian River Consulting Group channel framework. We were able to come up with what I think are some pretty compelling findings, which I obviously want to share with you now. Tomorrow at lunch, Mike Marks will present a fuller version of the findings. We would love to have 6 hours. I'm sure you would hate it, but we would love it, to present all of our findings, and you wouldn't be able to drink any cocktails or watch any football games, and you have to sit there and look at all of our data, and we think that would be really cool. And frankly, that's probably what it would take to give you the full benefit and flavor of everything that we found. But unfortunately, we have, I think, about 43 minutes left. So I'm going to try to boil all this down. Mike's going to give you much more detail on the findings tomorrow, And I'm going to give you kind of like the Reader's Digest summary of the Reader's Digest summary. The first piece that we have found is that this channel is extremely well adapted to the market that it serves. It's extremely well adapted. The distributors, by and large, own the contractors. If you want access to contractor spend in this business and you're a manufacturer, they're pretty much the only game in town. Now, there are exceptions and there are always specific products where that might not apply, but by and large, they are where you need to play. In turn, the contractors own the homeowner and builder channel, and they also own the GC channel. So, bottom line is, we don't see that changing. It's almost a given truth. The second piece, which might not be too shocking to folks in this room, is that a very high portion of the spend by the end users in this channel is what we would call inertial. And what we mean by inertial is that they have their preferred suppliers, they have their preferred ways of doing their business, and there are economic reasons why they are loath to even consider making changes. Because fundamentally, they are buying highly reliable service. And you don't prove that you're reliable in 1 day or 1 week or 1 month or 1 year. You prove that you're reliable in this channel over the course of 5 years or 10 years or even longer. So most of the distributors' customers have what we would call highly inertial spending patterns. And I'm going to talk more about this in about 5 slides. But statistically, I know these numbers are hard to read, somewhere close to 90% of the dollars that are spent by customers in this channel every year are spent on the same stuff from the same supplier as last year. And in a lot of cases, not just last year, but the last 15 years. About 8% or 8.5% of the spend in this channel has actually changed in any given year. And it's either the supplier has been changed or the product has been changed intentionally. Meaning I made a decision that I'm no longer going to buy part X, I'm going to buy part Y, or I'm no longer going to use supplier A, I'm going to use supplier B. That's about 8%. There's another 2% that's also changed, but there's a difference between that 2%. About 2% was changed because someone came and sold me something. Someone came to me and convinced me that if I switch from product A to product B, I will get a huge benefit. The other 8 to 9% that switched is because the incumbent supplier screwed up. I didn't want to switch. I wasn't looking for trouble, but trouble found me. So because my existing incumbent supplier screwed up, I ended up seeking out or being amenable to a new supplier or new brand. And so that's a pretty astounding finding, that approximately 90% of the spend doesn't move, and about 80% of the stuff that does move is moved not because someone sold them on something or disrupted them or convinced them, but because the incumbent supplier screwed up. The third big finding is that distributors are very well adapted to this reality. In other words, distributors have evolved to face this, and the distributors that have failed to evolve aren't with us anymore. This little innocuous looking pie chart is the result of probably about 700 to 800 man hours of work, and we have right now about 1.7 gigabytes of transactional data that we've gone through. And as a result of all of that analysis, we can say that for a typical distributor, about 34% of their expenses are involved in what we call operations, which is purchasing, accounting, inventory management, warehousing, things that are directly supporting transactions. Another 26% are support functions, which would be general accounting and HR and IT and executive management. And about 39% of their expenses are in some form of customer facing, counter, field sales, inside sales, those kinds of things. Of that 39% that is customer facing, 27% is in doing what we would call protecting the business, providing services to make sure that we've got reliable inventory, that our customers are satisfied, that we don't screw up. Because remember, screwing up is why 9% of the business moves every year. So we spend the vast majority, over 2/3 of our customer facing investment is on protecting the business that we have, which is a very, very important function. Shouldn't minimize that. About 10% of the effort that we put in our customer facing is involved in intercepting these opportunities. So I'm waiting, I've got a relationship with my customer, they know I'm a reliable guy. At some point, because I'm a good business person, I'm doing a good job in service, at some point my competitor is going to screw up and I'm going to be there to catch the business when he does. And that's something that I spend a lot of time investing in. And about 3% of the 100%, right? So 3%, which is less than 10% of my customer-facing investment, is spent in actively going and trying to disrupt somebody. I'm going to go to a customer, I'm going to sit down with him, I'm going to explain to him why this filter is better than that filter, why he can make more money on this equipment line and that equipment, and I'm going to attempt to sell him. The interesting thing about this, if you look at those pie charts, is that the way the distributors deploy their resources is a really good fit to what actually happens up here. And when you actually talk to the contractors about this, are you happy with your current supplier? What would you like to do? There's a lot of consistency that says that I'm really where I'm at because that's where I want to be, not because that's where I'm forced to be. It's not because no one's ever come here and convinced me. In fact, one of the things that's very common is a contractor will say, in the slow season, right? If you're in the south, the slow season is in the winter, and if you're in the north, the slow season's off in the summer. But in the slow season, all these reps come by, and the distributors come by, and the manufacturer reps come by, and they try to sell me because they don't have anything to do, and they know I don't have anything to do. But I know in the heavy season, when it comes back, that they're not going to be there when I need them. So frankly, I'm not even going to listen to them because it doesn't matter what they tell me, I'm not going to buy into it. So fundamentally, we have a channel that's very well adapted to the market, and the distributors have gotten to the point where they really do own this channel. And in fact, because they own this channel so well, it's actually created a dilemma for them. The dilemma for them is what we would call the irony of distributor performance. So let's take a plot here, two axes. On this axis, we plot the level of channel conflict. So low means that our distributors never bump bellies with anybody else. Maybe they've got an exclusive, or maybe there just aren't that many people out selling the same products, but they rarely compete with other distributors selling a product. High conflict means that everybody gets to sell the product and they're constantly running into other people trying to sell their customers, the same product. So if we have low channel conflict and high channel conflict on this axis, and then we have low coverage and high coverage on this axis. Low coverage would mean that in the market, not very many customers can even see the product that we're selling. And high coverage means all customers can see the product because it's widely available and everybody has access to it. If you're a manufacturer, as you are sitting in this room, if you've got a low level of channel conflict, your distributors are not whining, right? They're not saying everybody's got your product, and you have a low level of coverage. Not that many customers can even see your product. That says that you probably need more open distribution, right? You don't have enough avenues of distribution for your product. So if it's low conflict and low coverage, you should probably open up. On the other hand, if you're experiencing very high conflict, the distributors are constantly telling you that they're always running into other people, and your coverage is really good. In other words, nobody's having problems getting your product. Then you'd probably want to think about going with more selective distribution, just sort of in broad general terms. So coverage, which is the portion of the customers in the market that are served, and conflict, which is the degree to which distributors fight for the same business, both determine whether you should be more open or more selective. Now here's the interesting piece. Coverage is a function of loyalty, customers' loyalty to a distributor. If everybody is completely loyal to their distributor, in other words, they only buy from one guy and they never buy from anybody else, then your coverage is going to be very low if you only sell through a small number of distributors. So high loyalty tends to imply lower coverage, because in order for you to get access to a certain set of customers, you have to go to a lot of different distributors. But if everybody's always shopping amongst a lot of different distributors, they'll be able to buy your products at one of those distributors that they buy from. So the more loyal the customers are, the lower your coverage ends up being. Likewise, the lower the loyalty is if everybody constantly shops at every single distributor. So I'll buy from any one of 10 distributors at any given time, I don't care. then I can probably find your product much more readily, even if you're only in a couple of distributors. So low loyalty tends to imply much higher coverage. On the conflict side, if the distributor tends to have the brand power, in other words, if the distributor says, I know that people are buying from me because of me, not because of the products I carry, they'd buy anything that I carried as long as they got it from me, I'm the one with the brand power, then they're going to tend to not be as sensitive to channel conflict, right? Because I don't care that 3 other distributors are selling the same brand of equipment. I know they're buying it from me because of me, not because of that equipment. So the fact that other people are carrying the same equipment doesn't make me as angry. But if the brand power lies with the manufacturer, in other words, the only reason they come to me is because I carry that thermostat, and I know if I lost that thermostat, then they wouldn't come to me. If the brand power is very high, then that implies that they're going to be much more sensitive to channel conflict. So if a distributor's brand is more influential than the product, they're going to be less affected by competitors. So here's the irony of distributor performance. The better that your distributors perform, the more likely it is that you should be more open. Because if you have good distributors, they've got very loyal customers, right? Which means customers don't shop around much. And they have the brand strength rather than you, which means that their perceived level of conflict is going to be lower. So the irony is that the better the distributor channel performs, the more it makes sense for you to open up. Now, it's probably going to be a different conversation when Mike presents that to the distributors tomorrow at lunchtime. But that's the irony of distributor performance. So the conversation is, you guys do such a great job, right? And you've got such control over your customers, and your customers are buying from you because of your brand, not because of me, that I'm kind of in a position where I probably am going to tend to need to be more open. So in terms of quantifying these 2 dimensions, because this is a general statement that I'm making, I want to talk in a little more depth, a little more detail about customer segments. Now in this industry, we don't tend to think very much about customer segments, but it's a very important concept. Customer segments are groups of customers that are organized based on the things that how they want to buy from you, based on what they want to buy. So an owner-operator is a small contractor, generally unsophisticated, who's kind of a technician first who just sort of found himself going into business. And a professional dealer is a business person who's in the business of being an HVACR contractor. New construction contractor, refrigeration contractor, mechanical contractor are other animals. And then commercial, institutional, industrial would be typically a buyer or a facility maintenance type person. And these are kind of the key segments that the distribution channel serves today. Mike is going to give you more detail on what these segments really want to buy. But when we take a look at the two dimensions, which is the brand power and the customer loyalty, our research has given us some data about which products have relatively high distributor brand power, which is the red side, and which products have relatively low distributor brand power, meaning high manufacturer brand power, which is kind of the light yellow and the yellow side. So for example, some owner-operators literally they care about the repair parts that they buy, and they're focused on getting the exact right part, and they think to themselves, would I put that pump motor in my house, right? Is that the UV filter, the UV light that I'd want to have in my house? And if the answer is no, then that's not what I'm buying. Whereas more professional guys tend to be, you know what, the pump motor, if it's reliable, we're going to use the one that our distributor's carrying because we're not going to run all over town getting a different brand of pump motor. So in the case of the professional dealer, the brand power of the distributor is higher in that example than for the owner-operator. And so depending on the segment that you're talking about and the product line that you're talking about, the relative brand power of you, the manufacturer, versus the distributor ranges. And the red ones are ones where the distributor's brand power is much higher than yours, and the yellow and white ones are areas where your brand power is potentially much higher than the distributor's. So in terms of looking at this chart and trying to decide where you are in the brand power spectrum, this is what our data kind of tells us about your channel. The other axis, which is the distributor loyalty, or excuse me, the customer loyalty to distributors, you can see for almost all of the segments that there's really only 2 to 3 or maybe 4 distributors that customers regularly buy from. It's a relatively small number, and that it's pretty high portion of purchases comes through one of those. So there's a fairly high level of loyalty, even for somebody that you would expect, like new construction, for example. You'd think, well, those guys just have to buy whatever is specified, so you'd expect that they'd buy all over the place. But in reality, they tend to have a preferred supplier, preferred distributor for their service parts and supplies. And even in a lot of cases, believe it or not, although this is listed as low, there are examples where new construction contractors are very loyal to a distributor and will actually get a builder or a GC to move brands so that they can sell the line that they can install the line they're most comfortable with. And you can see here from the length of the relationship, these are averages. I mean, look at that. The average owner operator regularly buys from 4 guys, about 90% of his spend, and he's known or worked with those 4 guys for 19 years. It's pretty astonishing. So there's a lot of data behind this chart, but the intention is simply to give you a tool for understanding where you might be on this brand power loyalty spectrum. So let's try to make this a little bit more objective, a little more quantifiable. There's a fundamental trade-off between coverage and conflict. And so, but there are really only about 3 variables that are involved. I'm going to define conflict as the average number of competing suppliers that a distributor faces when they're selling your products. So when someone comes in and they sell your business card to that customer, if that same customer could buy your business card from 3 other suppliers that he regularly buys from, then the conflict factor is 300%. If he couldn't buy it from anybody except you, then there's 0 conflict. So we're going to define that as what conflict means. So imagine that you've got a market, and maybe it's the island of Kauai, and it's got exactly 64 customers, and it's got exactly 4 distributors, and each distributor is exactly the same, right? They all have the same share of customers, they're all equally performing. So just imagine, here are your 64 customers on Kauai. The first scenario is, imagine that you are selling through one of the 4 distributors in Kauai, okay? So if the customers are only buying from one distributor and you are only selling through one distributor, then you're covering 25% of the Kauai market. Everybody with me? Everybody's buying from one distributor. So you're selling through one distributor, you're getting 25% of the market. The conflict is 0 because none of these customers can buy your product from more than one distributor. And a bunch of them can't buy your product at all. So you've got 25% coverage of the market and you've got 0 conflict. Now let's say that you sold through 2 distributors. Now you're covering half the market. So half of the customers can buy your product, but there's still no conflict because they only can buy your product from one place because these customers only buy from the green guy, these customers only buy from the red guy, no conflict. Third distributor gets you to 75% coverage, and the 4th distributor gets you to 100% coverage of your market. But because everybody only buys from one distributor, you've got no conflict, right? So in terms of going back to this chart, we're in a scenario where because the loyalty is very, very high, right? Everybody's only buying from one distributor, it makes a lot of sense for me to have open distribution because that's what I need to do to get my coverage and it doesn't create any conflict. So let's imagine that instead of customers only buying from one distributor, let's say that every customer buys from 2 distributors. On average, everybody has 2 suppliers that they like to use. So if you appoint one distributor, you're covering 50% of the market, right? Since everybody buys from 2 distributors, you only have to have one signed up to get half the customer, to get access to half the customers. But you still don't have any conflict. Now, let's say that you start selling through 2 distributors. Now, you're getting 75% of the market, but 1/3 of your customers can buy from 2 different people. They can buy from the current distributor and from a second distributor, which means you got 33% conflict. As you add a 3rd distributor, you get 100% coverage of the market, but 50% of the customers can buy from 2 distributors, which means you've got a 50% conflict level. And if you add a 4th distributor, then you're still covering 100% of the market, but your conflict just went up to 100%. And if I take the same example and I say, imagine that all 64 of my customers buy from every single distributor. So they routinely buy from all 4 distributors in the market. If I appoint 1, I've covered the whole market with no conflict. If I appoint 2, I've still covered the whole market, but now I've got 100% conflict. If I appoint 3, I've got 200% conflict. And if I sell through all 4, it is a really ugly, brown, nasty looking mess like that, where I'm getting no more coverage, but I'm getting a lot more conflict. So this is the logic or the thinking that goes into the decision that you folks have to make about how many distributors is the right number of distributors. This dynamic can be modeled for your industry. And I'm going to show you a couple of graphs, and you really are looking forward to those cocktails right now, I can tell. So there's nothing like Excel on a Saturday evening, is there? This is simply a graphical representation. If customers only buy from 1 distributor, as you add more distributors, your market coverage goes up linearly. If customers can buy from 2 distributors, then as you add distributors, your coverage goes up like that, 3, 4, 5. So this is just a graphic representation. And by the way, this spreadsheet that we're going through all this on is what's going to be available to be downloaded for you to use as a tool. Likewise, if I look at the percentage of all distributors appointed by the manufacturer, as you add more distributors, the level of conflict goes up. And in fact, if customers can buy from all 10 distributors, and you appoint, let's say, 5 of the 10 distributors, you're at 400% conflict. So this chart just shows how conflict goes up. Here's the punchline. Here's the punchline. And you don't have to worry about the math, because we've done that for you. This tool allows you to look at 3 variables and make a decision about how many distributors you need in a market. The first variable is how many distributors are regularly used by the customers. And the data that we've showed you earlier is that for most of you, in most markets, that number for most segments is about 4. The next variable is what is the sensitivity of the distributor to conflict. So if the distributor is going to be happy with 50% conflict, in other words, if half the time my customer can buy from 1 other supplier, I'm not going to like that, but that's okay. Because remember, the distributor brand is very strong. Conflict factor of 1 says, on average, every one of my customers can buy from at least 1 other supplier the same product. Conflict factor of 2 says that, on average, every one of my customers can actually buy the same product from 2 other sources. So now I'm getting a little more. So as the sensitivity factors go up, you can see what happens. So with this tool, we start by saying, what is the number of distributors routinely used by customers in the segment that I'm looking at? So let's imagine that they routinely use 4. So I'm going to plot that. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, how sensitive are my distributors? So let's say my distributors are sensitive. Once I get to 1, they're going to scream, and I'm going to be in a position where I might lose some of those distributors. They might they might no longer stock my product. They might pick up a competitor. They might drop the line. So if the sensitivity is 1, the conflict factor is 1, that's how sensitive they are, then that indicates that I need to have 4 distributors signed up in the market. And again, you don't have to worry about the math. It's in the spreadsheet. We've got a listing of the actual mathematical formula. But the point is that there's an objective, quantifiable way for you and your distributors to look at the market and talk about when does it make sense to have more, when does it make sense to have less, and what are the reasons for that. And it's more than an emotional discussion or a subjective discussion. It's something that you can actually sit down and have a conversation about. And I'm going to show you in a second kind of the next piece of this. But this is an interesting tool. And I think one of the things that you should probably be thinking about as you look at this tool is how this might change the nature of the conversation that you're having with your distributors. Because it's one thing to say, you know, you guys aren't trying hard enough to sell my stuff. It's another to say, you just don't give me access to a high enough percentage of customers in the market for the math to work. One is an opinion and subjective and emotional. The other is factual. So this is fundamentally the distributor performance irony. And I've got one more tool And I'm sure that's the best news you've heard all day. The second piece that I want to cover, the second output from the research, and by the way, whenever you do research like this, we came up with a lot of different things, and we could spend 3 hours talking about all the things we found, but we're giving you kind of what we feel are the two most important models for you to use. So I want to go back and talk about something that we covered earlier, which is about the forms of distributor demand creation. And what we're saying is there are actually 3 different ways that distributors in this channel create demand. One way is protection. And protection means that they're ensuring that the critical transactional inventory services are provided consistently and reliably. And that is not a trivial thing. People can just say, oh, it's just high service, just inventory, just having the stuff. It's very hard to do well, and it's very, very important, and it's very highly valued by your channel. And I'm going to say that again. It's very highly valued by your channel. One of the things that we've learned is that you run out of breath a lot faster trying to swim upstream. One of the biggest mistakes that manufacturers can make is they throw money at a problem, or they try to convince people to buy something, they sell something that people just don't want to buy. So what you folks need to be very clear about is understanding what your customers are really buying. Not what you're selling, but what you're really buying. And you can promote the hell out of anything you want, and you can spend an awful lot of money on spiffs and counter specials and promotions. But if that's not fundamentally what the customer wants to buy, you're wasting your money. So the fact that protection represents the single most valued service that your customers want to buy and that your distributors are providing should tell you something about where your investment should be as a manufacturer. The second thing in terms of distributor demand creation is interception. And interception is saying, I need to have a relationship with customers because sooner or later an incumbent supplier is going to screw up, and I want to be there to catch that business when it happens. We've heard many, many, many examples of this. For example, I talked to a buyer for one of the largest counties in the United States. And that buyer had, every 3 years, they go out for contract and they get the distributors to look at the whole list of products, and they decide, they write all the service requirements. And a year ago, they had a bidding process, and they brought the distributors in, and 2 of them lost and 1 of them won. One of those 2 loser distributors continued to have conversations with that buyer. Now that might seem really stupid, right? You lost the bid, they're not going to bid again for 2 years, why are you wasting time? Well, guess what? The guy who won the bid couldn't meet the service levels, and they're in the process of firing that distributor. And you know what they're going to do? They're going to go back to the 2 guys that lost, and they're going to find out which one of those guys is going to get the business, and they're going to move forward with that. So the fact that they maintain that relationship to intercept that opportunity is very, very important. And if I'm a manufacturer, that's the kind of distributor I want. The third piece is disruption. Disruption is when a distributor sales rep goes and purposely interrupts, disrupts, intentionally tries to get a customer to do something different than what they were going to do. Fundamentally, protection is a way of holding on to what you've got. Very, very important. By the way, when distributors do things like if a guy comes into a counter and the distributor counter rep says, don't forget the line sets, that is actually a form, in most cases, not of disruption, upselling, but of protection. Because if the contractor did forget the line sets, and he goes out to the site, and he screws up the job, or he has to drive back and get something, he's going to be upset. And he's going to say, why didn't you remind me of that? And they may lose that business. So that's an example of protection. So protection is about holding on to your existing business. Interception is about getting the additional spend from the customers that already see you but don't buy everything they could from you. It's being there, being a good supplier, being ready for the other guy to screw up so you can take the business. Disruption is about potentially going after and getting new customers, or at least new business with existing customers. This is the only one of the 3 that actually gives you access to brand new customers. Now, if disruption were the primary sales process in this industry, then we could create a really cool model for you that would say 3 sales calls typically is going to yield this many successes, which turns into this many dollars, which gives you this ROI. okay? But because disruption is a very small part of how this market works, you can't just look at discrete sales activities and tie an ROI to them. It's not possible. What you have to do is look at the whole picture of protection, interception, and disruption and put together a model that gives you as a manufacturer an idea of how those things work together to grow your market. And that's what we've done for you. We've created a model that puts these three factors together to show you how all this stuff works. So we're going to give you an example in a second. But imagine that this is the entire market for your products. The island of Kauai, right? So we're selling capacitors in Kauai. For a given distributor, they may commonly see half of the customers in that market, right? So if customers on average buy from 2 suppliers, then the average distributor may see half the customers. So a distributor may see half of the market routinely. Those are how many customers either come into the counter or see a sales guy or occasionally buy something from them. Of those existing customers, any given distributor may only get about half of that business. So they're getting about half of that existing business of the customers they see in the overall market. This is really exciting, by the way. So the pink, the yellow, the red, I hope everybody's... Protection, which is number 1, is about making sure that your existing level of business doesn't drop. It's about holding on to that business to make sure it doesn't go away. And again, I want to keep saying this because you're probably thinking, well, that's just doing good service. That's the most important thing. If you as a manufacturer are not supporting protection selling, then you need to. And I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. The second piece is interception is about sort of waiting, for lack of a better word, and sometimes you have to wait 19 years, right? It's about waiting for the incumbent to do something that allows you to increase your share of your existing customer spend. Neither of those two is going to give you access to new customers. Disruption is the only activity that distributors do that actually opens up the customers they see and gives you access to them. So, when you're trying to think about what you want distributors to do and how many distributors you need to think about all three of these forces. And one example would be, let's imagine that a distributor comes to you and says, you know, you sell through a lot of crappy distributors in my market. These guys just take orders. And when you introduce a new product, I go out there and I pioneer it, I create demand for it, I get everybody interested in it, I start growing it, and then you start giving it to all these other guys, and they lowball me because they're not paying all this demand creation money. So what you really need to do if you want to sell more of this stuff is give me an exclusive. Right? Now that may make sense. It may not make sense. But what you're doing with an exclusive is you're basically saying, if I'm currently selling through 3 guys and I want to drop down to 1, I'm going to give up the protection of 2 of those 3 guys in exchange for better interception and disruption from the remaining guy. That's basically what you're doing. So, does that make sense? I don't know, but I've got a really detailed eye-strained spreadsheet that tells me if it does. So this model is going to be available for you, and I'm betting that most people in this room are not going to go have a cocktail. You're going to go right to your computer, you're going to download the spreadsheet, and you're going to start putting in different scenarios. Right? Okay. I was talking about swimming upstream a while ago. I'm kind of feeling like that's what I'm doing. I don't have time to go through every single line on this, but I can explain the basics. This model basically allows you to put in some parameters to understand whether it actually makes sense to give somebody an exclusive, and these are the factors. You start by saying, what are the total sales of all of my products that I sell for me and my competitors in the market? How much of those am I currently selling? If I look at a distributor, how much of my products is he currently selling? How many of my competitors is he selling? And then I put in a couple factors like the portion of sales that are brand-led, how many customers typically buy, or how many distributors the portion of customers which routinely buy from my distributor, how good is my distributor at protection, how good is my distributor at interception, and how good is my distributor at disruption. These are all factors that you can put in, and it's very straightforward. We've set it up so that you can put in 3 different scenarios: a green scenario, a blue scenario, and a red scenario. I guess green is money and red is bloody. So that's a good scenario, an expected scenario, and a bad scenario. And you'll be able to put in any numbers you want to see what happens. The model then says, okay, starting in year 0, what's going to happen? How much am I going to get from my protection? How much am I going to get from interception? How much am I going to get from disruption moving forward year after year based on these parameters? So let's take a look at an actual example. Here, I started out with $1 million in the market. Okay? The first year, I lose all of the sales, the protection sales that I had from my other distributors that I'm going to fire, but I hold on to the business from the distributor I kept. I get all of the stuff that he was selling of competing product, and I get all the product that's brand-led, because if it's brand-led, they're going to go buy it from any distributor. They're going to stick with the product rather than the distributor. So I drop down to here. But under these various assumptions, my revenue slowly starts to increase. In the strong distributor, it actually gets back to $1 million after several years and continues to grow above that. In the average distributor, it kind of slowly gets back up, but in this scenario, it never quite gets. And in the weak distributor, not only do I go downhill, but it continues to get worse and worse and worse. And this chart shows the net present value of that. Net present value meaning the discounted value of the revenue. And you can look up net present value if that doesn't make sense, because I don't quite have time. But basically, because in the red scenario, I get back to above where I was, my $1 million sales here, but I'm still, I was so underwater that it takes me a while to pay back. So by the end of the 10th year, I'm basically back to a net present value of 0. So that would be an example of comparing distributors. And you can also use the tool to compare different market characteristics. So optimistic assumptions, average assumptions, and pessimistic assumptions. The point is that you have a tool to sit down with a distributor and say, in order for it to make sense for me to give you an exclusive deal, this is, let's change these numbers until that becomes a positive value for me. That's how you have to perform. The key takeaway here is that there is math to tell you what's going to make it worth your while. If the distributor can give you access to high enough percentage of customers in the market, then it can very easily make sense to have an exclusive deal. But if they can't give you access to a certain percentage of the market, no matter how great they are at holding on to the business, the math's just never going to work. And if only 2% of the market is moved by disruption every year, then no matter how great they are at doing that, you're just not going to get enough at-bats. We had many contractors and customers tell us that they're not even going to open their door to a new supplier that comes in. So if you're not already selling to that customer in some way, you're never going to get access to them. And you're going to be waiting many years before a disruption opportunity comes. So that's basically the second model, which is the exclusivity payback model. We're hoping that between these 2 spreadsheets, you have a couple of tools that can give you allow you to have some very powerful, impactful conversations with distributors. So I'm going to wrap up by talking about some of the key findings that we had from the research, and taking some of those findings and sort of carrying through what the implications are for you as a manufacturer. One of the sort of cherished or common assumptions that we have is that we really need to get the good distributors. Some distributors have their act together and they're financially stable and they have really professional salespeople and they have great computer systems and they have succession plans and all this stuff. And so the common assumption is that there are major differences between distributors. What we've actually found is that based on the way that this channel works and the fact that 90% of the business is about 90% of success in this market is about protecting what you have, and another 8% is about just being there and looking good when the time is right, that it's much more important to have more stocking distributors that give you access to a broader portion of the market than having a few great ones. Another common assumption is that a great distributor is great because they make a market and they actively sell my product. Our research finding says that The definition of a great distributor is somebody that gives you access to the highest portion of your customers and someone who never suffers from what we call a critical selling event, which is where there's a failure that causes the customer to go seek another supplier. That's what a great distributor is in this market. Now, there are many examples, okay? There are many examples of really good, strong salespeople and sales events. And everybody's got a story about the time that we got the executives in the car and we drove out to the customer and we sat down with a spreadsheet and we showed him how much more money he could make and he saw the light and he said, "You got me, I'm yours, I'm going to start buying." We've all got stories like that. But a professor of mine once said that the plural of anecdote is data, right? And one story, even a story that's a really good story, even a story that you repeat over beers and gets better and better every year, is not the same thing as what the data is telling you. And what the data is telling you is that in general, disruption selling doesn't move the needle. So the best, I'm not sure how many reps we ended up talking to, probably not quite 100, but in that neighborhood. The best rep, and it was a man that I talked to, this guy walked on water. I mean, after 15 minutes, I wanted to buy a 3-ton unit from this guy, okay? I mean, he is awesome. And you just love him. You know, you're just melting. You know, the pen kind of falls out of your hand and you just have this like faraway look in your eye and this guy just starts talking and he was awesome. He told me exactly how he does disruption selling, and it was perfect. He shows contractors how to make more money. He explains to them how to get their technicians to sell to, because everybody knows technicians hate selling, right? They're technicians, they don't want to. He explains how he overcomes that psychology. He shows me how the products that he's got it completely laid out. And it was awesome. And I even, I had notes. I'm going back to I got one. This guy's great. You're going to love this. He gave me a list of some of his customers. And so this thing about research is that when the husband tells you his side of the story, then you go talk to the wife, right? And you get her side of the story. And it's kind of funny the way the two sides of the story don't always match up. So we got his customers. I talked to several of his customers. I talked to one who had drank the Kool-Aid. And they said, Frank is the greatest guy in the world, and he showed us how to make money, and we love Frank, and he's helped us grow our business tremendously, and that customer was up over 50% in 3 years. Talked to 3 other customers. Frank is great. We love Frank. Frank's the reason we want to buy. We buy from him. Okay. How much of your sales has changed since Frank's been on board? Not really any. Are you still buying from Frank's competitors? Yeah. Is Frank gotten you to sell any brand new products that you weren't selling before Frank, because he's only been in the market 3 years? No, not really. We just think Frank's great. So the point is not that there aren't examples or there aren't great people. The point is that when you look at the data and you see what really moves the needle, disruption selling usually isn't it. Another cherished belief is that counter reps advocate products based on the financial incentives. In other words, when someone comes in, they're going to try to upsell them or cross-sell them, and if they want a 13 SEER unit, we're going to work with them until he gets to a 15 SEER unit. And we're going to make sure that they're buying as much as they can. The data says that actively promoting products is very rare, and when it is done, it is primarily focused on making sure the contractor doesn't screw up. It's making sure the contractor has a successful installation rather than personal financial gain. There were some capacitors that were sold in this industry the last couple of years that come from China. Okay? Some of you are probably aware of these stories. Those had a huge failure rate, over 50% failure rate. Everybody remembers that. It was a phobic learning experience, right? We sold them these capacitors, and they got them in the field, and they all broke, and we're ripping them all out. So many people we talk to avoid any service part that's made in China because of that episode. So it's basically tainted an entire country, unfortunately, because of that phobic learning experience. How big of a spiff would a new Chinese capacitor manufacturer have to provide to get a counter guy to sell their caps? I mean, Bill Gates, right, could probably not get some of these guys to sell Chinese caps, because they're not going to do it because of the economics, because the contractors, the long-term inertial relationship with those contractors is so important to these people, and it should be. They're never going to risk that relationship for a single transaction to make a few more dollars or something else. Distributors do not sell new products based on features, functions, and benefits. In fact, they're scared of new products. They're paranoid of new products. The main reason that you need distributors to sell new products is because the distributors are the endorsers of the products. The contractor is scared to death. He's never seen a UV light before in his life. He's never installed a ductless. He doesn't even know that those things are scary, right? He's going to the distributor saying, have you guys really had like really good success with this? Because I personally don't know anything about it. And of course the manufacturer is going to say good things about it, but what do you know about it? And the distributor is not going to lie. No matter how much you've incentivized him, he's not going to lie, because that contractor is a lot more important to him than you are, because he owns the brand. So what you need to do is not focus on making sure they understand all the cool features, functions, and benefits. You need to focus on them being 100% confident that if they endorse your product, they're not going to look bad. It's not going to break in the field. And one of the reasons they do so much training is because a lot of the field failure is because it was installed wrong, right? So the training isn't about getting them comfortable and being able to, the training is about making sure that you don't have a failure in the field. And of course, distributors, primarily being disruption sellers, the vast majority of distributor resources are appropriately assigned to interception and protection type services. Tomorrow, Mike is going to repeat this slide, and in fact, it's the only one I think that is a duplicate of what Mike's going to show you. But in terms of the implications for you, again, we do a lot of work with manufacturers, and sometimes they come in and they say, we really want to get the distributors to promote or push this product. And we say, well, that's not really what they're going to do for you. And they say, yeah, we know, but we really want to get them to do this, right? So I want you to think about some of these implications tonight, because I think they're very important. One is, in terms of your investments in the distributor channel, you need to be low drama, you need to be safe, you need to be reliable, and that's number one. And if you can't get there, everything else kind of doesn't matter. New products have to be considered to be safe so that the distributor feels comfortable endorsing them. And one of the worst things you can do is create a critical selling event by introducing a cool new product and getting everybody all stoked about it, and then not being able to supply it on time or in quantity. Increase the number of locations where you have a primary stocking position. It is far more important to have as many locations as possible to carry your products, because inventory means that you are available, you're not causing critical selling event stockouts, and you're taking advantage of your competitors when they do. You want to be measuring your actual stocking positions. You don't want to be, I mean, of course you like getting POs, right? But from a channel standpoint, you want to be measuring your actual inventory performance at your distributors as your customers experience them. And finally, Mike and I learned a long time ago that there are rarely silver bullets in sales and strategy, and that success in this channel requires aligning your resources where there are misalignments. And we think that a lot of you folks are over-invested in what we would consider to be relatively low-value activities. Product promotions, counter spiffs, events, incentives, things like that are probably not high-value activities. And you want to think about moving some of your resources from those activities from those low-value activities into higher-value activities, and trying to align your resources. So again, I've tried to summarize a lot of research into a very small amount of time, and I do appreciate your patience, and you'll be happy to hear that I'm at the end of this. However, Mike and I are going to be at the HARDI booth this evening and pretty much all day tomorrow. So if any of this is remotely interesting, please feel free to come by, and we'll spend as much time as you'd like with us. And you don't even have to give us a purchase order. Also, don't forget to download this, and we've got cards as well, so I'll be happy to hand these out. And if you'd like, you can contact us at any point in time. And I appreciate your acting as our live studio audience for our folks on the webinar. Thanks very much. Enjoy the rest of the evening. Thank you, Lou.
Good job.
Oh, thanks, Sam.